Hello and welcome to week 5 of Introduction to Data Science. Last week was all about data importing and recoding. We talked about how to bring in data into R from rectangular data sources mostly, and we also talked about once we bring the data, how do we recode its columns, and that's when we touched on concepts like various data types and classes in an R. Later on in the week, I also posted 2 additional videos where I worked through the 2 application exercises for the week. So if you haven't tried those out, I strongly recommend that you do so. And then you can watch the videos, and you should absolutely, especially for those ones, feel free to skip ahead if you feel comfortable with some of the exercises. But then for those where you feel like you might need a little bit of additional help, just watch through them. The answers are there for you. And if you have any additional questions, Piazza is a great place to ask them. There were also some questions from the quiz for last week, especially questions 7 and 8 came up a lot among the comments that you left in the form. So I want to go through those real quick. So questions 7 and 8 were very similar to each other in the sense that we were asking which of the following would necessarily improve this visualization. So the first one was about where on the x-axis we had the months. So going from month 1 to month 12. And then on the y-axis, we have the mean departure delay for various airlines. And we had 5 airlines plotted, each indicated by a line and in different colors. So the ones that would, the improvements that would necessarily happen are the ones that are that have the check marks next to them. But I want to talk about the ones that are not, since I think that might be a more productive conversation for those of you who have gotten this question wrong. One of the ones that's not checked is the one that says flip the coordinate. So months are on the y-axis and mean departure delays are on the x-axis. I think that this actually would make the plot more confusing as opposed to improve it. Usually when we have a time variable, we like seeing that on the x-axis since that kind of looks like a timeline. So you should always think about years, months, or any sort of like time of day sort of variable appearing on the x-axis. This is not a rule that necessarily is 100% of the time true, but I can imagine many situations where that would be a preferred visualization than putting time on the y-axis. Changing the colors of the lines, maybe they could be made better, easier to distinguish, but this would not necessarily improve this visualization since the colors of the lines is not something that we're necessarily kind of focusing on here, but more looking at how there's a dip around the month of October, so on the 10th month, for almost all of the airlines for mean departure delay. Changing the background color of the plot. So we've talked about changing themes of our plot. I've mentioned, for example, that theme minimal might sometimes be useful, something with a white background, depending on your audience. But this is more of a personal preference than a definite improvement to a visualization. And using bars instead of lines to represent the data, I'm having a difficult time even picturing what a bar plot for this would look like. But generally, a bar plot is something we use when we have categorical data, or if we are thinking about bars in a numerical data sense, which is like the month here, that is represented as numbers, perhaps that would be a histogram, but that would be giving, both of those are for displaying count, so neither of them would work. There are also visualizations where you might have like the categorical kind of the month in the bottom, and then the heights of the bars would perhaps tell us the mean departure delay for that month, but that would not necessarily be a better visualization than the line plot, and especially we wouldn't be able to see this dip around month 10 that we're seeing with many of the airlines here. Even if that was possible to identify from the bar plot, it wouldn't necessarily be as clear. Question 8 was similar, where we basically had the various airline codes at the bottom, and you don't necessarily need to know what the codes are in order to answer this question. And then we have how many flights were leaving the various airports in New York. So EWR was Newark, JFK, and LaGuardia. Those are the 3 airports with the 3 facets. Using airline names instead of carrier codes would obviously help improve the visualization, but what are some things that wouldn't help? Changing the background color, again, we have talked about that with the previous question. Using a different color for each bar. That would be adding a little bit of color to our plot, sure, but it's not necessarily an improvement because we're not using color to track a particular airline throughout the facets here. Place carrier names at an angle so they don't overlap. Them not overlapping is indeed a good idea, but usually placing things at an angle does not necessarily improve the visualization. We do want to be making them legible. Some things we might think about are flipping the plot so they are on the y-axis or somehow expanding the plots. But placing text at an angle is rarely making it more legible. In fact, anything where you have to go like this with your head is probably not an improvement. Using a histogram to represent the data, this certainly would not work out here. On the x-axis, we have a categorical variable, and a histogram is for a numerical variable. So a histogram and a bar plot look very much alike, but remember that the order in the in a histogram on the x-axis is informative. And it basically is used for representing numerical data, not categorical data. Another comment that came up a lot in the feedback forum for the quiz was difficulty with join functions. So I wanted to point to two resources. One you already know about from the week 3 videos, specifically the one titled Working with Multiple Data Frames. So if you've missed the questions about join functions on the quiz, and you haven't watched that video, or you haven't watched it carefully, or if you feel like you don't remember what we talked about there, go back and watch it. It's only about 17.5 minutes, and I think that will be a good investment for reminding yourself of that material. Obviously, you can go back and read the relevant chapters in the book, but sometimes rereading something you may have already read may not necessarily help. So I might also recommend a different resource. Since these join functions live in the dplyr package, if you go to the dplyr website, which is dplyr.tidyverse.org, and look under articles for 2 table verbs articles, so these are verbs where we use that are used to bring 2 tables, so 2 data frames together. Specifically the section on mutating joins, I think will be useful for you. Those are the ones we've mostly focused on. Mutating joins, meaning that we're adding columns to an existing data set when we join them together. So it's another representation of similar material with some code and some examples in there. It is package documentation that's going to read a little bit different than the book or the videos, but sometimes a different perspective can be helpful for letting these ideas sink in. So I would recommend that as well. And coming on to week 5, this week is about communicating data science results effectively. So we're going to talk about making better data visualizations. We're going to talk about structuring a data science question. We're going to talk about scientific studies and what we can get out of them, and specifically thinking about how we look for relationships between variables from various scientific studies, and based on the design of the study, what we can ultimately say about our conclusions. Are they causal, or can we only make association statements? Can we generalize our results to a wider population or not? These are roughly the topics for this week, and we're also going to touch a little bit on coding style this week as well, in kind of a general theme of communicating really anything we're doing in this class effectively. So when you're thinking about an audience that is not going to be developing your data analysis with you, then we're thinking about communicating results. But when you're thinking about an audience like your teammates or the course staff who is going to actually be working with you in the nitty-gritty of doing your projects, then we want to be thinking about how do we actually present our work effectively as well, and coding style is something that comes into play there. 2 things I want to highlight for this week is we are going to be doing peer evaluations. You should have already received an email about that. Please make sure that you turn those in so that we can actually take a look to see how the teamwork is going. I know that you have done only a little bit of work with your team so far, but it's important to identify any potential issues early on. Your answers for some of the questions on the peer evaluation will be shared with the rest of your team, and some of them them. The ones that are identified as for my eyes only will be for my eyes only. And so I'll be reading through those before Friday's workshop and checking in with teams where we feel like we may be able to help you get to a better workflow. Additionally, you're going to be working on your project proposals with your team. So throughout this week, I encourage you both individually and also collectively as your team, think about what data set you might want to work on for your project. And during Friday's workshop, you'll get a chance to work on your project proposals as well. But please, please, please do not let all of that thought process to Friday. Friday's workshop is supposed to be about doing, not as much thinking. So we would like you to do that thinking ahead of time. Hope you enjoy the week, and as usual, I am looking forward to seeing you in the live sessions for the week. Don't forget about our student hours on Tuesdays with David and on Wednesdays with me. We have the code along sessions on Thursdays, and then we're going to do the workshops on Fridays. And any additional questions, post them on Piazza and we'll be answering them there. And please do answer each other's questions as well. Some of you have been doing that, and that's been great. And I'd love to see more of you sharing what you're learning with others as well. Have a good rest of your week.